So it's going to be a review of Avatar: The Way of Water, the sequel, long time in the making to the first Avatar from 2009, the highest grossing film of all time. Now you notice that I said sequel, long time in the making, and not long time awaited sequel. Just because even though the original Avatar is the highest grossing movie of all time, the movie didn't really leave that much of a cultural impact in terms of staying in people's minds. It was a movie that made a whole lot of money mainly because it sort of got people to go see it with its 3D gimmick and the visual effects and how much people were sort of boasting about the visuals and whatnot. But in terms of being like an iconic film, like something like, let's say, Star Wars or Jurassic Park or some blockbuster on that level, wasn't really on that kind of level when it came to being in people's memories and whatnot. But regardless of how long viewers have been or have not been waiting for this sequel, James Cameron has finally given us Avatar: The Way of Water. And much like the first Avatar, the film and James Cameron himself promises that the movie will be the ultimate technical showcase of 3D, spectacle, visual effects, and all of that. For that reason, I went to go see the film in IMAX 3D to see the full blast of all of these visual effects in 3D that this movie, James Cameron, promises that the film will be. For that reason, it's not even worth mentioning the story of this film off the bat, because it's the visuals which is what people will get people really to go see this film. The first Avatar had a whole lot of CG going for it, and a lot of impressive CG. When it came to the characters and the motion capture technology, the environments, the creatures, the action, the vehicles, all of it was very impressive on a technical level, just in terms of how much CG there was in the movie. Well, this movie's level of CG, Avatar: The Way of Water, is even on next level, even compared to the first film. The level of detail and precision on the rendering of the characters and the motion capture, the environment, and the extensive amount of underwater footage this time, it's really impressive stuff. You see where every last penny of this movie's gigantic budget went to. There are a lot of movies where at the end you see the budget and you ask yourself, well, where did all that money go to? Not here. Because for this movie and how long it is and how many visual effects it has going for it, you see where every last penny goes to. And it's very impressive, the level of detail in the visual effects and everything it's got going for it. Besides that, the other major gimmick that the first film had was the 3D technology. James Cameron was really pushing 3D technology in that film, and that's what helped contribute to the commercial success, which was everyone paying the extra dollar to go see it in 3D. Now, what they said it was sort of immersive 3D, not the type of 3D where it's someone poking their finger at the camera and you sort of like touching the screen and sort of like feel their finger and shit like that. It was an immersive 3D, so like you could really bring yourself into those environments and shit like that. So it even started a whole 3D craze after the first Avatar. But that era has sort of gotten kind of bypassed or phased out over the last few years, where it felt like audiences were getting tired of 3D. And now you hardly see any 3D at all in movies in terms of like showings. I think the last 3D movie that I saw was when I saw Avengers Endgame the second time, back in 2019. But really these days, 3D hardly really ever see at all. Well, the 3D is back in full force in this film. And it's the same kind of immersive 3D that they use in this film to really add depth and sort of immerse you into the world. Although where I will call bullshit is that it's the same thing with any movie, where eventually, even though you're watching 3D and it really gets you the first time, the more the movie goes on, you eventually get used to it to where you don't even notice it's in 3D anymore. That, and unfortunately, there's still the same thing where the film is noticeably darker in 3D. A lot of times during 3D movies, and this one, I'll take my glasses off every now and then to see sort of the contrast. And if you do that in this film, you see how much darker the screen gets with them 3D glasses on and how much brighter it is without them. Something that unfortunately hasn't been fixed in the last decade since Avatar has been out, but it is what it is. I kind of felt the same way about the first Avatar, where it did have impressive 3D, but in the end, I do have to say that I've seen impressive 3D in other movies. It's hardly like Avatar was the only movie to ever have good 3D. I guess the big thing with that movie, though, is that the level of CG and all that around it, using that kind of 3D technology in there, did add a whole lot of depth and sort of fun to the world during sequences when like characters are flying on creatures. The water shots, the vast sort of environment shots in this film definitely does help a lot. Although I don't know if this film is going to have the same kind of impact when it came to 3D, just because I don't think it's anything substantially different from what we saw in the first Avatar. Now you'll notice that I haven't touched on the story or characters yet. Many consider the story to be easily the weakest part of the first film, and I would agree with that. Despite coming from such an innovative filmmaker in James Cameron, the story was so familiar, cliche, predictable, yeah, anything you would want to mention. That when it came to the story and also the characters also. The best way to summarize it was that it was Pocahontas in space. Not a whole lot of depth when it came to the story, super predictable, and yeah, I was just repeating what everyone else has said over the past few years. Now, in this film, Jake and Neytiri have established a family together, but eventually the humans return, bent on getting revenge for Jake and his Na'vi uprising. That's the best way to describe things here, without going into super deep sort of story spoilers and whatnot. Now, while the whole revenge angle isn't anything special story-wise compared to other films we've seen, overall I will say that this film story-wise is much less predictable and cliche and familiar than the first film. The way the story plays out, the beats that it has, it doesn't have that annoying sense of familiarity that the first film had. I would mostly say the same thing for the characters here too, even though I will point out and say that there wasn't really a ton of real sort of story or major character development that revolved around our main duo, Jake and Neytiri. Those two don't have a ton of story development here or character development, even though they obviously still are the prominent figures here. It's their kids that really have the most stuff going on here character-wise and do get a whole lot of screen time throughout this film. It's really the actors of this film are the element that I find to be the most fascinating and most underpraised element of definitely this film and even the first film to a certain extent. The work these actors are putting in when it comes to interacting with these fake-ass environments, all the stuff they interact with in terms of other characters, the fact that you don't actually see them in the flesh, at least most of them, it's kind of a thankless job in that regard. It's truly impressive stuff what these actors like Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldana, and others do here. Now, to my knowledge, the reveal of how certain characters return wasn't really shown in the trailer, so I'm not going to go into major spoiler territory when it comes to that. But I will say that the return of Stephen Lang's character here, while it was pretty silly in terms of the sort of science behind it and whatnot, or the reason, I was happy to see him return here. You know, he was great. He was great in the first film, even though his character was Colonel Cliche. It was very familiar, much like a lot of stuff in that film. But he was still really good in that role. And here his character has definitely more to do in terms of just straying away from that cliche type, even though you do see a decent amount in this film. And there is more nuance added to his character to where it does add some more depth and a lot of sort of interesting dynamics when it comes to the decisions he has to make. There was a reveal here that was one of those like kind of sequel reveals, like, hey, and how about this? And it's kind of like, well, I guess. And like I said, it did make his character more interesting here. And I will say that the actors who play the kids here, Jake and Neytiri's kids, were solid also. There's 3 or 4 of them, and all of them were pretty good throughout the movie. So I'm watching this film and I'm seeing stuff that made the first film work, you know, in the decade plus so, and we've gotten a lot better visual effects and that stuff was really good. And that development was good in terms of how that played out. And like I said, the story wasn't anywhere near as familiar or predictable as the first film, even though it was a simple revenge story at its core. But then something happened in the middle of the film. Without going into story detail about what was going on story-wise in depth at that time in the movie takes a turn, and instead of focusing on anything consequential story-wise or any kind of meaningful action, it turns into an elongated underwater showcase. When it comes to sceneries, creatures, Na'vi swimming, that's about it. That stuff was definitely cool at first, but then it just kept on going and going and going and going, and you get the idea. And in total time, that section of the movie felt like it was about 40 minutes or so. Maybe it was even pushing an hour, but you get the idea. It was a very long sequence of just pure underwater footage. It was at that point I kind of checked out of the movie because it was just becoming very repetitive. I also started to think and realize that James Cameron has a major water fetish going on. When you look at the work that he did at that movie, The Abyss, obviously Titanic, plenty of water there. And now you have this movie, Avatar, The Way of Water, even got water in the title. Clearly this guy loves him some water. And the underwater footage here is definitely amazing on a technical level. You know, just the way the environments look and just the shots they get, it's truly beautiful. And the score that goes along with this stuff definitely adds to the overall sort of beautiful nature of how this stuff is going on. It's just that that's all the movie was focused on for such a long stretch. It definitely became more style than real substance, as, like I said, story wise, the movie just comes to a halt. Way too much so. The movie just had lost me for just a long stretch of time, which was a shame because I definitely thought that the movie started off pretty strong and was going in a good direction until that middle act. But then the final act came along, and where we got sort of the big sort of final battle and whatnot. Now, there's nothing that I enjoy more in a movie than a huge blitz of a final battle. I'm talking about stuff that we've seen in Avengers Infinity War or Endgame, stuff like Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, the final battle in that film. Those kind of just like big, bombastic, epic kind of battles that really make you go like, whoa, that was something right there. And this movie has a climax that's pretty badass. It has some great action to go with its visual effects and plenty of those moments that, like I said, make you go, God damn. It's a section that takes place over the sort of the final, I'd say about 50 minutes of the movie or so, where everything really comes to a halt, and all of it is pretty entertaining to watch. Unfortunately, much like the movie itself, that final battle does start to drag on for a little too long, to where towards the end of it, I was starting to go, all right, time to wrap it up. And even then, it still kept going and adding some more stuff. I was like, whoa, this is definitely a lot right here. 3 hours is definitely a journey for a movie, a real journey, because this movie, including the credits, clocks at 3 hours and 10 minutes. So without the credits, you're looking at about 3 hours and 2 minutes in terms of being in that theater. And that's a long time to go through. I can forgive that for certain movies, like obviously Avengers Endgame, I thought was the worst of it in terms of that kind of runtime. And even something like James Cameron's Titanic, which I never watched in theaters, but I think the length is justified in that movie, works for me on that level. But this movie, like I said, it had a middle portion that just was not working. I really liked the beginning of the movie, the first hour or so. I thought it got off to a really good start. And I liked roughly the final hour where you get the big sort of climax. But it's the middle portion of the movie where it was just going on in circles here. And that was definitely the biggest flaw. There's some other miscellaneous stuff I can mention, but in the grand scheme of things, I mentioned the main stuff that really has the major effect on the movie right here. I feel the same way doing this review as I did when the movie ended, to where I was like, man, there was some stuff I really did enjoy in that final battle. Overall, it was pretty spectacular. But I can't forgive a movie that's 3 hours and 2 minutes and has an entire middle section that was essentially kind of putting me to sleep. Like I said, started off okay, but once it kept on going in circles, I was like, ooh, man, this is just not quite doing it for me, even with these visuals and whatnot. So I would go a 6.5 out of 10 for Avatar: The Way of Water. For reference, I would give the original film a 7 out of 10. Even though I think that film obviously does have its fatal flaws when it comes to story and whatnot. I think it was definitely leaner, even though it was only by about 20 minutes or 25 minutes, something like that. And I was never bored in the original. For all the familiarity that it did have a sense of wonder in discovering this world for the first time and whatnot. And just, the visuals, the effects, and just seeing this new world for the first time definitely was kind of special. You don't quite get that here, as we've already seen Pandora and what kind of stuff, goes along with that. But this time was just showing a whole bunch of underwater stuff. But like I said, the movie does still have plenty of special stuff that makes it a fun time if you're going in as someone that really wants to see it for its visuals and whatnot. Because those visuals still are great. And like I said, the CG is on next level even compared to the first film. Appropriately so, since it's been over a decade since the first Avatar. It's just that there's a whole lot to sort of get through when it comes to the movie being a little uneven, especially in middle portions, and some other miscellaneous stuff that I can't quite spoil here because it would be a story spoiler, but you'll just have to go and see it for yourself. This is a movie, though, that if you have any interest in seeing, you're going to see it in Dolby and IMAX, the way they've been boasting to see it on the biggest screen possible with the 3D and whatnot. Not that the theaters are really giving viewers much of a choice here. It's just when it comes to seeing this movie in the theaters, they're either giving you the choice of either see it in 3D or don't see it at all. So if you want to wait at home, you're going to be waiting a while to come see it on Disney Plus and whatnot. But if, like I said, if you're someone that does want to go see it for those 3D and visuals, they will definitely not disappoint, because the movie is definitely an A+ on that level. It's just that as an overall movie, there's some stuff that, much like the first film, definitely could have used some work, I'll put it that way. If the question is whether or not this movie got me excited for the Avatar sequels that are to come, I would say, no, not really. but I'm sure they'll be just as technically superb as this film. There is some story elements going on for this one that does set up for a sequel, obviously, because those sequels have already been filmed, to my knowledge, that obviously I still am kind of curious about. It's just that in terms of being excited for the future of these movies, I mean, they're talking about doing a ton of more Avatar movies. I don't know if this franchise is really going to warrant that on a story level, but we'll just have to wait and see. So that'll do it for this review of Avatar: The Way of Water. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching.